Welcome to the Association 4.0 podcast, your association's no-fluff playbook to navigating and thriving in Industry 4.0 or the digital marketplace. Each week, we bring expert insights to help you and your association stay ahead of the curve.
So I'm back with Jim Lahey today, talking specifically about channel development for associations. And we're going to focus today a little bit more on chapters. And chapters we think about primarily, I think, in North America, although many associations will have chapters across the globe. So Jim, welcome, and thanks for being here.
Thanks, Sharon. It's good to be back, and looking forward to kind of diving a bit deeper into the chapter part of channel management. So thanks again for inviting me today.
Great. Let's get started then. At the beginning of our last podcast, you talked about how business associations have enjoyed really a unique position in our society. And for years and years and years, it was almost like they were the only game in town. But more recently, I think for-profit companies have been looking at associations and saying, well, if that works for them, why can't it work for us? Why can't we have a for-profit that offers some of the same services as nonprofits? So we're seeing a whole lot more competition, I think, in general. Is that your experience as well?
Absolutely. I mean, I think we all can recognize in the association space that we're witnessing a lot more competition, be it from academic institutions or online training organizations or frankly, free content from the internet. Mm-hmm. But I think it's important to kind of know organizationally what your value is and what you offer. And I firmly believe that associations remain in this really distinguished and unique position as unbiased, trusted agents who have these knowledge bases and these member bases that are really unparalleled in the market. And so let's not forget the value that we as an association community bring to industry and bring to individuals and bring to academia. And let's make sure we are aligned with the needs of the market today. So I think that we talked a lot about, obviously, channel management. And I think that fundamentally, channel management principles can help associations adapt their strategies for this increasing competition, particularly with, how their chapter networks relate to their whole partner cosmology or partner universe.
So let's dig in a little deeper there. When you talk about a partner network, which includes chapters a lot of times, sometimes it goes beyond just chapters, why do partner networks matter today?
Right. So great question. And just kind of as a revisit one of the key concepts of our first podcast is if you have chapters, partners today, you already have a channel network. And let's look at really what the value of a channel network run properly can be for an association. It provides you with the capability to have local presence, local market knowledge, and relationships in places that you're not currently geographically located. Partner networks are also cost efficient because these separate organizations are building the market based on their funding, their dollar versus yours. They're scalable, so you can add partners where you need them, and properly executed, you can really revitalize growth. So channel partner networks most certainly matter, including chapters, because again, they help you extend your capabilities without having to have direct staff to do it.
Yeah, and chapters are a little bit unique. So for organizations that have more extensive channel networks, and those channel networks include chapters, we also often think about chapters being kind of a special group of channel partners. They're certainly local organizations, right? But in a lot of ways, they mimic some of the services that the national or the international association is also providing. So it's interesting now. We talked a little bit in our last podcast about direct delivery and whether our chapter networks underneath our total channel network are as relevant today as they have been in the past. What's your opinion about that? Are chapter networks still relevant?
My opinion is strongly yes, absolutely, they are relevant, but probably not in the same way they were relevant 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20, 30, 40 years ago when they were originally constructed. So yes, they're relevant, but not in the same way that they traditionally were. You know, kind of back in the day, and you and I have talked about this a lot, Sharon, but chapters were really the only way an association could engage with their members when their members were not at a regional, national, or international meeting, you know, kind of pre-internet. And then, of course, now, because only accelerated by COVID, members can really seamlessly engage digitally when and where they desire. But nevertheless, a healthy percentage of association members can really benefit from what I call that last mile engagement touch that chapters can provide, but they want to do it on their own terms. So I don't think that chapters are outmoded, but I think the way that chapters are kind of incented and governed and framework is probably not in line with the needs of the market today, but that resource of those engaged volunteers helping engage your members is super valuable, and managed properly with a channel strategy can really help accelerate an association's growth.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've heard you use a term before that I wasn't familiar with, so I'm going to ask you to explain that a little bit to our listeners, and that's channel stasis, and use that in I think that you were referring to it in relationship to the governance of the chapter network. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. Yeah. It's a term of my own coining, but you know, I think a lot of times chapter networks, they become stale, and what I call chapter stasis sets in, and that's really when there's not an active governance or an active management or an active channel strategy that is really trying to help that community of partners move forward in alignment with the needs and the goals and the aspirations of the association. So things become stale. And a lot of times when things become stale, people start to second guess the relevancy of even having that partner network. But it's not about the relevancy as much as it is, are you actively managing your channel? And if you're not, you're likely going to succumb to what I call channel stasis, which is not a good thing, Sharon, as you can expect.
Well, and you know, it's interesting because I think to a large extent, we have many associations have kind of this love-hate relationship with their chapters. On the one hand, you know, they would like them to require less, let's say less from a maintenance perspective, or the parent association may be feeling like they put a lot into their chapters and they're not getting the same level of return. It's not making as much of a difference. And so then we'll see periods of pullback a lot of times where they'll stop supporting the chapter network or stop engaging as much as they used to. And it almost feels like, you know, there's peaks and valleys in that relationship from a management perspective, so that we bounce around from active to passive to active to passive management. And so in some ways, when we look at that over the long haul, it's not surprising that chapter stasis kind of sets in, because we maybe we haven't been as even or as diligent in applying our governance as we should be. What are you seeing when we talk about what's the difference between an actively and a passively managed chapter network? What are some of the distinctions that you make?
Sure. Good question. So one of my observations about kind of classic association management is that most of the chapter networks and most of the partner networks were managed passively. And a lot of times I like to kind of think of visual analogies. So the way that I observed when I entered the association sector that most volunteer partnerships were managed was, you know, think about a motorway, a highway of 3 or 4 lanes in you know, going in one direction, and either side of those lanes are the shoulders. And I think kind of classic association management, that passive management, is you kind of observe the traffic on the road, but you only engage when the traffic is veering off the road onto the shoulder. You comment on the traffic, you see what direction it's heading in, but you don't necessarily actively try to direct that traffic in a direction that's in alignment with the organization. And so that kind of classic association management, I think in this world, and we talked about it already with much more competition, I just think it's outmoded. So the chapter management staff professional staff team of today needs to be much more active in aligning the needs of the association with the drives and the actions of the volunteer partner network. So in doing so, and I think if you use channel management strategies to construct a much more active stance as it relates to your chapter network, it will result not only in benefits for the association, but for the chapters themselves, because it's just a much more modern and productive way to dedicate resources. Because when you kind of passively do anything, things can go in a variety of directions that are likely not good for the association, but frankly, not good for the partners either.
Yeah, so let's kind of dig in a little bit more specifically. What do you think the components of like active channel management are? So if an association is evaluating whether they really are actively engaged in managing their chapter network, or they're really more on the passive side, what are some of the indicators? What are some of the things that associations need to be doing if they want to actively manage their chapter network?
Sure. So, that active channel management stance is really underpinned by a comprehensive channel program. And that channel program has some key elements. The program is essentially, it's a document, it's a framework that has a balance of rules and benefits that are in the interest both of the association and also of the partners. There has to be a clear rules of the road. People need to know within the community what is acceptable behavior and what is unacceptable behavior. And this might sound kind of very simplistic, but let me tell you, a lot of chapters are probably not run with the right kinds of rules of the road. The kinds of rules of the road that help really drive growth and drive engagement and drive the member growth and member satisfaction. So in addition to that, I think another element that's part of any channel program and needs to be the part of any chapter program is a very clear partner tiering and segmentation. A lot of times with chapters, I observe that there's kind of what I would call a three musketeers type construct. And what I mean by that is, one for all and all for one, which is good. In a volunteer network, you kind of have that egalitarian spirit. But in reality, the service levels and the capabilities of partners varies from partner to partner. And your clients, whether they're individual members or companies, need to be able to discern which partners are higher functioning and have better capability. Therefore, you need to have a very clear partner tiering and segmentation that rewards and identifies who the top performers are. There needs to be an annual evaluation process, so people really are held accountable for their actions. And as part of that, there needs to be kind of this annual call, because if you don't curate actively manage your network and you let underperformers gain benefit, then it accelerates that state of channel stasis, which, as we know, is not a good thing. And then the other thing is to have a very clear, easy to understand channel partner agreement that drives the right behaviors with the partner community. And I think if you look into the association space, a lot of these elements exist with current chapter networks, but not in the commercial way or with the commercial stance that, or the professional channel management stance that I think can really help revitalize and fully leverage what is a wonderful resource, these local volunteer chapters.
So contracts of any form, I think, for a lot of people have kind of a negative connotation. And it's, and I'm, anymore, I don't know why. I know when I started my career and I was having to look at contracts, and originally it was with technology vendors and associations, but I picked up at that point that people really had a negative concept about contracts. But what I came to learn as I negotiate more and more contracts is that contracts clarify expectations on both sides.
Yep.
And the funny thing is, as difficult as contract negotiations can be, they make the rest of your relationship a whole lot easier when you're living into that, the contract, and you took the time and did the hard work to really understand what a win was for both sides and what the expectations are and what your responsibilities are, then it tends to support a smoother relationship. How much, I talked before about that love-hate relationship that a lot of associations have with their chapter networks. How much of that do you think, in your experience, is based on the fact that the chapters and the parent organization or the main organization just don't share that set of expectations and understanding of what works for both partners?
Yeah, I think it's I think it's a contributing factor. I think a lot of times, when you witness antipathy in groups of people, a lot of it emanates from lack of understanding and lack of appreciation of the value that the individual parties bring. So I think if you're really looking to move a network of partners forward, foundationally, you have to really understand not only what you're looking for and what's in it for you, but what's in it for them, and then what they bring to the table. So I think once you begin to have an appreciation for that value that third party brings, at least if you can articulate it, it creates the right dynamic. Because I really think that love-hate dynamic is it's unfortunate, and it most definitely originates from misunderstanding on both sides and an anxiety for the future, and that directionally either the association or the partners don't feel like the momentum is to their advantage or is adding value to them. So I did want to touch upon one other thing you mentioned, which is the contracts. And a lot of times contracts are like an act of war, Sharon. I mean, this. You've been involved in doing a lot of contracts, and I think when you're a big market player with a lot of market power, a Fortune whatever company, maybe you can be like dictatorial in your contracts. But in reality, when you're an association and you're trying to drive partner relationships, you want to make sure the essentials are in there, the right kind of framework to do the accountability and the stuff we already talked about. You want to make sure that there's legal cover for the association so that when your partners undertake activities, you're not somehow encountering liability. You want to make sure that those partners are responsible for things like taxes, et cetera. So my advice for associations is, don't try to have the perfect contract, because a lot of time contracts are like prenup agreements. You only look at them when you're going through a divorce, okay? You negotiate them and you park them on a shelf. But you do want to make sure there's, within the framework, it drives the right behaviors, and it provides a context of protection, the right kind of protection for the association. And then don't try to get everything in there, because that's just, usually a recipe for creating the wrong kind of conflict.
Yeah, make yourself crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Today, as we're recording this in the beginning of March and 2021, and looking forward to some very hopeful signs about coming out of the pandemic and, kind of getting our economy back on track. And this has been a very difficult year for a lot of associations. And I think we talked about in the first podcast that we see associations that hadn't gone through a digital transformation being forced to do so in 2020 just so that they could, direct delivery. And what we're seeing a lot from a trend perspective, a catchphrase that's being used as more businesses, not only associations, but businesses as a whole, are delivering online more, is this low touch economy. So we can see this almost anywhere. If you Google low touch economy, you'll see that we're talking about making this transition from high levels of customer service and high levels of contact to customers really helping themselves. And there's no question that that's happening. I have a little trouble with the term because from a human nature perspective, and this might be age, I'm challenging myself in my thinking on this, so I'm somewhere in between the beginning and the end of how I feel about this concept of the low-touch economy. Not the digital, but this term low-touch is bugging me for some reason. And when I think about chapters, one of the things that I see is that a way that associations can kind of bounce back from this period of isolation where we haven't been able to get together in person and we haven't had a lot of contact is that, the local chapter may be a way to re-engage members. And I'm wondering, is this a good time for associations to look at revitalizing their chapter networks? And, what would you recommend that they do if they're interested in revitalizing?
Great question. I think it's absolutely a great time, because I think you and I and a lot of people do believe that this pendulum may have swung completely in the direction of low touch and direct engagement. And there's going to be some profound changes because of COVID, so that those direct connections have become, more durable and more important. But it's funny, probably that association direct business is best suited for low touch interactions. But the reality is that a lot of members and clients need some local higher or medium touch. And so, the beauty is it doesn't have to be one or the other. You can continue down the pathway where it makes sense to have that low touch engagement and transactional relationship and direct engagement with your clients and your members. And it can be supplemented by having that local medium to higher touch capability as well. So I think really these concepts are very compatible. And so now is an excellent time to really take a new look, a new approach with your partner network and make sure that it's aligned for the needs of the post-COVID era, which is a much more hybrid, seamless experience between that direct digital engagement with periodic, national to international engagement at meetings, combined with a more in-depth last mile local engagement.
And, I think that I agree. I think that that's true. I think this is the part that I'm struggling with, is that I just think as much as we've advanced from a digital perspective, and I, like helping myself to a large extent, one of the things I'm really connected to right now at this stage of, the pandemic and, where we are in being able to bounce back from that is that I think there's pent up demand for the high touch as well. And I like the way that you're talking about the fact that, the parent association can move down that direct delivery line and meet that need for the people that are looking for more of that low touch experience. But for the people that really want to engage, and this is something that we're really seeing in the millennial generation, is that need to engage, not just online, but in person, your chapter network can be there for those members as well. And in the end, ultimately what the association should be focused on is facilitating members getting their needs met, whether it's at the national or international level or at the local level. So I really like that kind of distinction, that there's a role for each of these types of organizations to play. At the same time,
exactly. Yes.
What I will say is that I am empathetic with association clients who really work hard on getting, their chapters to change or to make change or to advance with the time, and they feel like they're really just kind of stuck and they're managing the way that they've always managed. And, so I'm kind of wondering, do you think that most chapters aren't interested in changing, or what do you think that dynamic is when you have local volunteer leadership, especially where you may not have paid staff at the chapter level?
I think that the belief that most chapters are stuck in the past is, I understand where it comes from, but I think it's misplaced. And it's a symptom of a more passively managed channel altogether, because channel programs are ultimately not about telling or dictating what a third party partner does, including chapters. It's not about micromanaging their day-to-day movements and, trying to architect their innovations. Channels are about creating a framework that then incents the right behaviors and discourages or penalizes the wrong behaviors. And the power of this is that if you create that framework and you create the vision that is adopted not only by the association, but by leaders within your chapter community, then you can rely on the actions and decisions and innovations of your partners to drive things forward. So I think, there is a lot of opportunity in having an activated network of chapters that is really working relatively within the direction that you want them to, and is driving innovation and driving engagement. And so I see great opportunities. I mean, what do you think? I mean, you've got such a long history in engaging with chapter networks. What do you think about that misunderstanding that you and I, witness from time to time? What's your thoughts?
Well, basically, I see myself even as a consultant as an educator, and I think that, in general, and it's all about people, because chapters are led by people, right?
Yep.
It's about helping them kind of make sense of what's going on and the changes that need to be made, or where their market is changing, or the new kind of member, the millennial member that's coming in. And I do think that when we provide people with a combination of a belief that they can make the change, and then also incentives to make those changes, that will often, if they have the time available, and this is the dynamic of having volunteer-led chapters, and we can't underestimate that. If the volunteer leaders have the time to make the change, we provide them with, the information and the incentives that they need to make those changes, I think more often than not, they're going to, move down that path. At the same time, what I will say, and, I'm not such a Pollyanna about this, that I don't see with some of my clients where they have partners that, and they may, by the way, I'm going to use more broad terms here, not just chapters, but partners of any kind that are so kind of stuck in their way of managing and how they do things that they simply just are going to push back when you try to introduce new information, or you try to introduce new incentives, or offer them, what could be new insights or education. They're just going to push back. And those aren't good relationships. And I'm kind of curious, from your perspective, how do you deal with that partner who won't change when you've given it a good try, let's say, not right off the bat, but you just are seeing that the partner is not going to change, and they're making a negative impact on your organization. Maybe they're not adequately addressing the needs of the market they're in, so they're hampering your growth, or maybe they're just a negative influence on other partners. How do you deal with the chapter that isn't going to change?
Well, great question. I think ultimately anything you do as it relates to kind of revitalizing or re-engineering your chapter network, as we discussed in the first podcast, it has to start with the needs of your members and your customers. You can't lose sight of the fact that ultimately what you're trying to do is to develop resources and drive behaviors that meets the needs of the customer, which is the member or the client. Your partners are never your customer. Your chapters are never your customers. They are your partners. And you can best serve them by having a very clear and distilled framework on how you govern your channel that holds people accountable for their behavior. So I would say, to answer your question, how you handle it is through having a very well-developed and clear channel program that is actively managed and actively curates those who are performing and not performing, and then you let the chips fall where they may, and you let individuals make choices on how they want to spend their time and what behaviors they want to exhibit. And that's how I believe is the best way to manage a channel. And you know, a lot of times we've come upon in the association space these loud voices. You know, a lot of times they're long-serving leaders within a chapter community or within an association volunteer community. These, you know, they're dissenters. Now, personally, for me, whenever I come upon somebody who's let's say an exuberant dissenter, that's never bothered me, because I find a lot of times that people who are passionate are trying to drive for excellence. And if you can find passionate people to get behind what you want, those are actually the kind of people you want. So personally, for me, as part of my journey in any channel that I've managed, is I've actually gravitated to at least understand the point of view of those passionate dissenters who are productive. You know, the passionate dissenter who's not doing anything, I wouldn't spend a lot of time with. But the passionate dissenter who's actually being productive, they're probably worth a listen. And you don't have to agree with them, but you need to understand at least what their point of view is. And I have found that particularly in a chapter construct, as long as people feel their point of view is at least heard and understood, they don't necessarily need you to agree with it. So, you know, I think all of this comes down to, Sharon, what we talked about already. It's a much more interactive, active management. You know, you can't do a lot of the things you need to do to architect change and architect revitalization if you're sitting on the viaduct observing the traffic and the flow of lanes and only getting involved when people go out of bounds and go on the shoulder. This will not work. This is the passive model. And back in the day when associations were king and there wasn't a lot of competition, that was okay, but it's not okay now. You need to be actively engaged. You need to have a vision of where directionally you're looking for the association and the channel to head in. And you need to kind of gain buy-in for that, you know. So I know I kind of blethered on and on there, but
that was very helpful.
Sorry about that. Sorry about that. No. I'm sure you wanted to hit the mute button on me, Sharon.
No. I think that this is really, I think everything we're talking about is really important, especially, again, for organizations that are looking forward to coming out of the pandemic, and how do they work with their channel network as a whole, but especially their chapter network, to be partners in getting their member needs met as we move forward. So this has been great, Jim. Thank you so much for participating. I know we have another podcast scheduled that I just want to tell people about the next time that Jim and I are together. We're going to talk about creating an international channel. And I think for a lot of associations that aren't already, or maybe they just are dabbling a little bit with international partners, this is going to be an important conversation for you to hear and to be able to lean into Jim's experience on this, because you have quite an extensive background on the international, the non-North American side of channel development. So we'll look forward to that. In the meantime, Jim, how can people get a hold of you if they have questions about anything we've been talking about today with chapters?
Oh, excellent. They can contact me at jim@revivoassociates.com. It's REVIVO associates.com.
And of course, you can reach me at Sharon@orgSource.com as well. So Jim, I look forward to talking about international channel with you next time. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Sharon. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
We hope you enjoyed this episode and discovered tips and information that will add value to your leadership style and your association. orgSource specializes in positioning teams for success with solutions for technology, strategy, and marketing. Please contact us at info@orgsource.com or visit www.orgsource.com to find out how to keep your organization on track to Association 4.0.